Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there, welcome everyone to this week's episode of Next Level Play Therapy. And I am so excited about my guest today, Karen Doyle Buckwalter, who is an expert in play therapy and using an attachment lens, which is my favorite as well, using an attachment. So today we're going to talk about what is the AAI. So AAI, for what we're going to be talking about, is the Adult Attachment Interview. So what is the AAI and what's the benefit of using the AAI, getting trained, because you have to have the training to use AAI. What's the benefit of that in play therapy? And one of the things that I get asked all the time is, how do I integrate parents? And in my opinion, if this is where your case conceptualization comes in initially, where you're going to do some assessments as well, you're going to understand and figure out. So case conceptualization is what exactly is the problem? Like, what are the roots and what are the patterns sustaining it? And in this way, we need to be looking at a systemic view of things with children and families. And the adult attachment interview, I feel like that is such a great tool to have available for you to use as you're doing that case conceptualization, which then results in and leads to your treatment planning. So now that I know what the problem is and why it's happening, now what do I do about it? And so when we're talking about how do I work effectively with parents, how do I engage parents in the play therapy process, that's part of that treatment planning that I usually talk a lot about. And what do I do with that information? And I feel like this is a really important conversation. So I was really excited to have Karen on today. So let me do a little intro for Karen and then we'll get started. Karen's a child and family therapist. She's been working with children and families for over 30 years. She's a registered play therapy supervisor. Woohoo! Mm-hmm. And she is a TheraPlay trainer and supervisor. She's an author. She's got an amazing book out and a podcaster, and she has a really awesome podcast. She's got a really awesome Facebook group. So, and her area of expertise is attachment. She's got years of working with children with attachment issues, working in residential care, working in foster care. So she brings a wealth of information to the play therapy community, and I am so happy she's here. So if you're joining live today, let's see who's here. Go ahead and post your name in the comments, where you're from, what population you work with. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to comment. Also, what we would ask, though, is not post about specific clients just for privacy reasons. Because it is a public format. And if you have some more general questions, feel free to post those and we will get started today. Welcome, Karen.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. And when I heard from you about being on the show, I was so excited because when you were on my podcast, I just felt like, oh, wow, we're kindred spirits. Like
I
we
did too.
love a lot of the same things and have been trained in some similar ways, such as with Bowen Systems Family Therapy. So I'm just so happy to be here today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, one of the things we were talking about before we went live, was our mutual interest and that one, research. What is research saying, and how does that inform our practice? And research around that intergenerational pattern, those attachment patterns, which I think is really, part of that case conceptualization. Like, that speaks to the acuity level. The more generations of trauma, attachment, poverty, addiction, the more entrenched some of the patterns are. And that kind of helps you understand the family system you're working with, the child you're working with. Yeah. So when I saw that you were doing your AAI course again, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to see if she'd be willing to come on. I was so excited.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
So,
Well,
yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what the AAI is?
yes, I absolutely can. So the AAI, which stands for the Adult Attachment Interview, is an interview that was developed by Mary Main and several of her colleagues. And it is about 20 questions, although there's kind of sub questions that go with some of those questions. And when Mary Main, I want to just give a quick snapshot of the history. Mary Main worked in Mary Ainsworth's lab. She was a student of Mary Ainsworth. And not only did Mary Main create the adult attachment interview, she also was the person that recognized in the strange situation the babies who were disorganized and not fitting into the three primary classifications that Mary Ainsworth was working with at the time. So we have here a brilliant scientist and somebody that just has such an eye for patterning and what is happening in patterns, that she was able to see this in the strange situation. Like, some of this is just not adding up for a group of kids. Also, she then, because she has, Mary Main wanted to be a linguist. That did not work out for her for some different reasons, but she had a love of linguistics and linguistic training. And so she paid very much attention to language. And what she was noticing in the parents who were coming to the lab and they were doing a strange situation with their babies, that there was a certain way the parents talked about their own history who had secure babies in the strange situation. There was another way that parents talked about their histories whose babies were avoidant in the strange situation. And another way parents talked about their own histories whose babies were ambivalent resistant, and then whose babies were disorganized. And again, it speaks to the incredible scientific mind of her being able to listen for these patterns. A researcher's mind is different than a clinician's mind. We look at nuance and differences in people. They look for patterning and sameness, right?
Right.
So it's a very different, it's a very different, so that they can see, are there boxes some of these people fit in that are similar, and what can we learn about that? So she came up with these questions that she thought would elicit what she was kind of hearing, like that pattern of moms or dads whose babies were secure, that pattern of moms or dads whose babies were avoidant in a strange situation. What questions could one ask that would highlight these patterns that she was seeing? So they came up with the interview. And of course, in research, you then have to come up with a way of coding it, of sameness, and how do we use this instrument. And so a whole coding book was created, reliability testing. The course that you go to, which I did go to, is called the Adult Attachment Institute, AAI Institute. Sometimes they call it AAI Boot Camp. Yeah. So it's 2 weeks and you learn the coding system. So when an adult attachment interview is given and used for research purposes, because I always think if you're going to adapt it clinically, you want to know how it's officially done, okay,
That's
before we start adapting, right? So when it is used as the research instrument, which is what it was created for, you give the interview, and the interview is then transcribed verbatim. And so you then have this long transcript, sometimes 20, 30 pages of this interview. And the coding system is then you code the transcript. You code how people are speaking about their story. And so again, this linguistic piece comes into play, because it's not necessarily what you say in the adult attachment interview, it's how you say it. And we are looking for coherence. This is a big word in attachment. We talk about a person who is secure has a coherent autobiographical narrative. That's something we talk about in attachment work. It's also what many of us are trying to do with children that we work with. We're trying to create a coherent autobiographical narrative for them, because this is linked to positive outcomes in adult mental health. Like, I know what happened to me. I understand what happened to me. I understand the effect it had on me. And your story, I like to say the story kind of holds together for you, rather than having holes in it and dissociated parts to it and things like that. And so so when we actually code an interview, we have that transcript in front of us, this long thing. We are going through it line by line.
Wow.
Every line is numbered. So if I were supposed to say, I see this specific indices for dismissing attachment, and in the coding sheet, I would have to put, and that is on line 162 to 167. Really, like, that's how detailed it is.
Wow.
So, obviously, that's not going to be something that fits into a clinician's world. Depending on your experience, it takes 5 to 6 hours to code one interview.
Wow.
We also aren't usually transcribing our conversations and, recording them and then paying someone
right.
So when I went to the training, I became completely fascinated with the adult attachment interview, but like, how is any of this going to fit into clinical practice? And so I was very determined to find a way to do that. And I think today we're going to talk about the way that I found to do that.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it's always interesting, like you said, I always like going into the history as well to get a sense of how it came about, to better understand it. And when you think about it from that context, you realize the importance of how they say it.
Yes.
When parents are talking, like, why am I paying attention to that? What is that rooted in? Like, yes. I'm always one of those people, like, just because you say it doesn't necessarily mean I want some proof.
Right.
Are you making things up? Like, where'd that come from?
Yes. And perhaps the most crucial thing that I need to say about the interview that I haven't yet said is, once they came up with the coding system, they saw it had 75 to 85% correlation with what a person's baby would be in the strange situation. And Mary Main has said it would be closer to 100%, except that both the strange situation and the adult attachment interview are difficult to code. It's not like a BASC where you circle numbers and then we put it in the computer and it generates something, like it's the strange situation. You're watching this baby, you're watching reunion behavior. It's just much harder to think about how do I code in a consistent way human behavior. But what was a watershed moment for attachment research was the fact that the AAI wasn't looking at anyone's behavior. It was looking at how you consciously remember this, or unconsciously remember this story. So it took attachment theory and understanding to what we called the level of representation in the mind. Okay, so in the strange situation, we're not necessarily looking at what the baby's thinking. We're looking at their behavior. Like, are they easily soothed? Do they approach the caregiver? Do they avoid the caregiver? Do they turn around and walk backwards? That's all behavioral. So that we were looking at behaviors in attachment classifications before. This took all that out of there and said, the way somebody thinks about this, I can predict what their baby will be. In other words, I'm predicting how they will be with their baby just by how they think about their history, which is really kind of mind-boggling.
Well, and that kind of, it sounds like, and you correct me if I'm not getting this right, but it sounds like that ties into that whole mentalization process, that reflective formation, which utilizes memory and helps me make sense of the intentions and the beliefs and the how I make sense of other people's emotions and values. Like that ties into some of that autobiographical memory from that concept of mentalization, which is big in attachment as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in very simplistic terms, I might get thrown out of an attachment lab with how I'm going to say this, but I think for us as clinicians, it's the adult attachment interview is measuring and understanding and quantifying in a way the internal working model of the adult.
Right.
Like we are looking, like what you said, what are they holding in their mind about their history, which Bowlby would say is our internal working model.
Right.
How we think about our history, how we think about ourselves, how we think about the world, and all of that. Now, there is, interestingly enough, a separate scale that was developed by the Steeles and Fonagy that looks at reflective function in the AAI. And reflective function is a system of measuring mentalization capacity.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's how, like, if we're going to use those terms, like strictly like a researcher would, we look for mentalization capacity in the adult attachment interview by so this is a whole separate coding system that you would get training on, separate from Mary Main's system, where we're looking at attachment classification. Some of the questions in the AAI that pull on that is, why do you think your parents behaved the way they did? That's going to require you to mentalize. You're going to have to think about their experience, their behaviors, how that's all connected. You have to move outside of just how it affected you. So we have certain questions that draw on mentalization capacity, and that is where there's other parts of the AAI where the reflective function scales can be applied, but those questions, like we call them, like the big RF questions, are more towards the end of the interview. But at any given time in the interview, somebody could be exhibiting the ability to kind of get in the mind of another, understand the mind of another. And that's a big part of mentalization.
Right. And because I talk about that a lot. I think that's a really important thing to understand, how attachment and those experiences from beginning really are accumulated over time and help us understand what's going on. Yeah, that's really interesting. So how do you use the AAI and how, in your courses? Obviously you're a clinician, fascinated with research, and you're that clinician. So you're taking the science side of it and applying it in a practical way for use to help children and families heal. So how do you, so I have to apologize. I don't know if any of you guys are listening and you hear this really weird scratching and boinging sound. My dog, because my husband left for work about 5 minutes ago, and he didn't open the door to my office, which means my dogs are sitting outside my door. Trying to say, "Mom, let me in," and they're getting louder.
Are they allowed in during this time? Do you want to go let them in and all
carry on? Yes, yes, because otherwise they're going to.
I can start answering the question a little bit while you do that, if you would.
That sounds good.
Yeah. So how I'm using the adult attachment interview. First, I want to share with listeners that I did use the AAI as part of a research project in looking at the adult attachment interviews of adoptive parents and how that was impacting their relationship with their children and length of treatment and engagement in treatment and all of that at Shattuck. As part where I used to work, I worked at Shattuck for 30 years. Part of that was coding every single one of those interviews. And we would then have a monthly meeting where we would dissect these interviews and look at, once we had the classification, we would then look at, what nuggets, what pearls are there in this interview that we could use clinically, aside from the classification of the person, just parts of their story. Because what the AAI does, it elicits a story from a person that has never been told before in this way. It's a very unique story. And you will hear things that, even if you were, we're talking about play therapists now, so you may not have done a whole lot of assessments with the adults, but even if you've worked with an adult for a long time and you do an AAI, you're like, whoa, there was a lot that I didn't know and understand, because the AAI taps into the unconscious.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So obviously if something's unconscious, they're not sitting down and telling you about it and actually they're not maybe directly telling you about it in the AAI, but because of how they're speaking about it, you get a much deeper understanding. Is there coherence and resolution around this issue, or is this really very bungled up inside of them and needs some work? Because we look at traumas in the AAI too. So I began through that process really refining my skills of using the AAI clinically, because if you go to the 2-week course, you don't learn anything about how to use it clinically. So I left that course and I was like, okay, now what? I can sit down with these transcripts and dissect them and all of that. But how is it practically going to be helping with parents and children? And so that started this partnership and project with Miriam Steele from the New School.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So we would meet with her every month, and she also coded our AAIs. And so I thought, gosh, with all of this, experience with the AAI, I think I could put together some kind of learning for others to use it in a different way that it's used in research. So to answer your question, how I do it, I give the AAI to parents of any child that I am working with. And then I I also often, because I'm a play therapist, do the MIM, the Marshak interaction method. And what I found is the feedback I give on the MIM drastically changed and deepened because of the information I had on the AAI.
Wow, that's so
right?
cool.
Right. Yeah. So, just a quick example, like when we look at the 4 dimensions in therapy, structure, engagement, nurture, and challenge, and I might talk about structure a little bit and say that it was a really unstructured parent. The kid was running all around the room and knocking things over, and the parent was just kind of shrinking instead of being able to come forward. This actually is not an unusual dynamic, especially
we can all relate.
Yes. And, I would kind of explain structure, and I would say, maybe point out other points in the MIM where they did do structure, and, how I'll be showing you that in therapy and blah, 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 the psychoed about structure, blah, blah, blah. So, and of course they would politely listen and things like that. But once I had the AAI, everything changed, because then I could say something like, and your boy's like really getting pretty hyped up and kind of out of control. And I know you shared with me that your dad would get like that. And when your dad got like that, you knew it was time to go and hide in your room. So now I'm saying, when someone acts like that, come forward. And maybe every bone in your body is telling you to retreat. Maybe that's why you haven't come forward up until now. So you see how this is a completely different thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so I still had my MIM data or whatever other data you had, but I could so deeply apply it because I entered the story of I brought in the story of the parent. The AAI allows me to hold the story of the parent inside of me. And that changes everything that I do, because instead of looking at just one wounded baby in the room, the child, I now know I have 2 wounded babies in the room. And what do I have to do in service of both of them in order for them to move forward in a different way in their relationship?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, to me, that was one of the big reasons I thought what you're doing is really important, because as play therapists, we really, the way that I look at it, part of our job is how are we supporting parents to help them do exactly what you're saying. If we leave parents out of the equation, then we haven't made the lasting change that we really want to make. That the reason we get into therapy profession to begin with is to make a deep and lasting change in the lives of the people that we work with, because it's a hard job. We hold hard stories. We do hard things. We hear hard things, right? But how do we do that to help families, children in their families, move forward? Like you were saying.
And we know from the data that has now been collected over many years of using the adult attachment interview, depending, which site you're looking at, about 60 to 70% of people in a non-clinical population. That means they've not been to therapy, they're not talking about any problems they have, are coming up secure. Many times our parents are not a non-clinical population. Maybe they have their own history of trauma, depression, anxiety. So if you factor that in, maybe that brings it down to 50% of maybe the parents. Even if you keep it up at 60 to 70, there's a significant portion of parents that you're working with who are insecure themselves. And so if you're working with a child with attachment problems and their caregiver does not have a secure attachment, you're not going to be able to in 15 minutes of play therapy a week, move the child towards attachment security when the rest of the time they're in a caregiver system, to use Bowlby's language, where the person parenting them is not secure. Like, you can't be insecure and parent your child to security. And we can't therapize a child to security if they're spending all of their time in an environment with a caregiver that's not secure. So it doesn't make sense to me if this is part of the picture to not have parents very involved.
I 100% agree with everything you just said, for sure. And I think in the play therapy world, I think I'm starting to hear more and more people wanting to know how to work with parents, which is really encouraging to me. I talk a lot about it in my trainings and on this weekly episode, these weekly episodes. And I think it's an important topic. And so I was thinking, like, how, for those people who are interested in your training, to get more training, because these areas we're in a profession, we're lifelong learners. That is the reality.
Right.
And I always feel like it makes us better people anyway.
Yes. Yes.
So, and these to do it well, to do it with competency, to do it with ethical integrity, we need to get the training.
Yes.
And so if people are interested in your trainings, in the AAI in particular, can you say a little bit more about your training? And then what we'll do for those of you interested, any of you watching on the replay version, or those of you listening to this on the podcast, if you're listening to it on the podcast, the AAI, Karen has them over and over, so you can probably find them on her website, and as well as some of the other trainings she does. But she does have this AAI training coming up. So, and we'll post all that in the comments as well. And how to connect with Karen, we'll post that in the comments. So for those people who are interested in the training, can you tell them a little bit about the training?
Yes. Well, I want to start out with what it's not, because I don't want any confusion about this. It is not going to teach you to code transcripts and say, oh, I just coded this transcript and you're in the dismissing classification and da 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 da. What it's going to do is, because you can't do that unless you transcribe and code the interview, you cannot assign someone a classification. That doesn't mean there aren't people out there doing that. Right. I'm just telling you, ethically and scientifically, that's not acceptable. Now, the way I have used the interview is just like I mentioned earlier. It brings forth a story that you are not going to hear in any other way that is really critical. I do teach how to correctly administer the interview, because even though it's a list of 20 questions, it's not just, you don't just pick it up and give them the 20 questions. There's a way to go about it. And it's very different than other clinical interviews that we do in terms of how you go about it. So I think it's important, and I do teach how to administer it. I do teach some highlights of the coding system so that you will kind of, I think this person sort of leans towards a more dismissing style. And that's all you need. Like, you have their words, you have their story. You don't have to be like, okay, I know that's what they are. So I teach people to look for a direction a parent's leaning and uncover parts of the parent's history that make them vulnerable. Just like the example I gave you. This woman was very vulnerable to a kid getting really agitated and hyped up and ready to act out, because as a child, she was conditioned, get out of the way. Mm-hmm. He's upset. You don't stay present. I would have never known that. And I would have just kept asking her to do these things, and she wouldn't have been able to do them because of how activated she became around that behavior. So They're going to learn how to, it's a 6-hour course. They're going to learn how to administer the interview. They're going to learn how to listen for coherence, which is not what we do as therapists. We just listen to what they're saying. And if it's a little bungled, we kind of figure that out. So listening to speech patterns, how they say things that are clues that, oh, the way they talked about the loss of their father, it's very clear that's not resolved because of the way they speak about it. So then oh gosh, some significant unresolved loss. Okay, I need to take that into consideration that they may need some work either with me or someone else about that. So that's what you're going to learn is an understanding of the parent before you and their strengths and their vulnerabilities from an attachment perspective.
That sounds awesome. And I think those are really, really important skills. I always say we listen, as therapists, we're trained to listen deeply, right?
Yes.
And as play therapists, we listen deeply to their play. And I think listening deeply to parents to know where and how to support parents.
Yes.
Is really important as play therapists. And then, from there, we kind of figure out what model we're going to use to help them move forward. And that sounds like a really, really awesome training. So for those of you who are interested in this particular training, I put the link in the chat. And then we will post in the chat my amazing virtual assistant, Brill, who shows up as Dom. That's his other name. So he'll post those in the links for those of you who are interested. If you want to find out more about Karen and check and see what she's doing, her website is KarenDoyleBuckwalter.com. So you can pop over there to her website. And it was great having you on. Thank you for being a guest. It was really good. And I could chat with you for forever. There's not a doubt in my mind. Anyway.
We might have to have a part 2.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yes. And you get some really awesome people on your podcast.
Thank you.
Follow you on LinkedIn, and I said, "Oh my gosh, she's got that person."
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. It was such an exciting journey being able to interview all these giants in the field of attachment. I would timidly ask and expecting them to say no, and then they would say yes, and I would be so excited. So yeah. And I really appreciate you having me here today. I'm very passionate about the AAI and the depth of understanding it can give us of caregivers, and how it changes our level of empathy and understanding of why they're being the way they're being, and having compassion for that rather than frustration.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. All righty. Well, that is it for this week's episode, and I will see you guys next week. Next week, I have another guest, which I'm really excited about, because the other issue that comes up a lot is working with parents in high conflict divorce. So, tune in, and I will see you guys next week. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.